Hey, it's up and live. Oh, there you are. All right, we're
There we
up
go.
and running. Hello.
Are we live to the people?
We are live to the people, and they'll start logging in here shortly.
Fantastic.
So I'm looking forward to this conversation with you, Trevor.
Yeah, me too.
Oh,
I think it's going to be a blast.
yeah, it's going to be great. And I mean, really, there's so much uncertainty going on today in the market right now. And that's really what we're going to cover. What we're going to talk about is how do you deal with the social, political, and economic uncertainty? And when we talk about transitions in dental practices, what are some of those uncertainties that you're seeing among the dental practices that you work with and among the hundreds of doctors that you serve?
I think we're going to have a great conversation. Good topics.
Yep.
So, good stuff. How's the weather in Bakersfield?
It is cold and rainy, which I like. So it's
Yeah.
good to get some rain, good to get some weather, replenish our reservoirs.
Yeah. How do the dogs do in the rain?
They get very curly.
Okay.
And for those of you who don't know, we have two standard poodles, so they're already pretty curly. But they're little princesses, and they kind of look at the rain and think about going out on it.
But they're not keen on the rain.
They are not too keen on it. No one ever told them they're supposed to be water dogs.
Yeah.
Never got the memo.
George apparently doesn't care about the rain,
Okay.
which is great for him and terrible for me because he'll take his sweet time, sniffing around, looking for that perfect spot. And I'm out there with the leash. This is a 6-month-old puppy. So he's not really in a position to just go bounding out by himself at the moment.
Well, and not just any puppy. What kind of puppy is George?
He's a little King Charles Cavalier. He is probably the cutest puppy of all time. But he gets away with everything because of the cuteness.
Nice.
So
very good.
Not something I know much about.
I see people logging in, and glad to have everyone here. So we're going to be covering just the social, political, economic uncertainty that's out there in the world today. We're going to be sharing with you how you can really prepare your practice for the uncertainty and how you can get a plan together and some actionable strategies to navigate this ever-changing dental market landscape. So excited to have you here. Go ahead, type in the chat. Where are you from? Where are you logging in from? And what questions do you have about just the world today? Because we want to certainly make sure we address and help you. This is going to be a very interactive session. In fact, Trevor and I don't even have an agenda. We're just rolling with it. So
don't be afraid. We have an agenda. We have not vague. We have a couple bullet points we're going to hit.
Exactly.
But it's going to be a fun conversation.
But aside from that, it's really just about serving you and making sure we address. So yeah, please type in the chat. Where are you from? And where's your practice at? And how has the economy been affecting your practice? On a scale of 1 to 10, just give us that. A 1, it's totally devastated everything. And 10, you're doing awesome and things couldn't be better. So where do you fall on that scale? Just put that in the chat. We'd love to hear from you as you're logging in.
See.
And so, Trevor, before we get actually officially started, what are some of the challenges that you've been seeing? We don't want to know how we're dealing with them yet, but what are the challenges that you're seeing doctors face today?
Yeah, I mean, depends kind of what problem we're trying to solve, obviously, of what challenges we're facing. If you're looking to buy a practice right now, you're looking at rising interest rates and just this sort of general sense of economic uncertainty. Is this a good idea? It's a big commitment. If you're looking at selling your practice, you might be looking at your portfolio being down a bit and all this stuff, and you're like, am I really prepared to hang up the handpiece and stop working? Is this the right time? If you're mid-career, you're probably facing some staffing shortages. I know assistants and hygienists are particularly hard to find and keep right now. And there's a lot of openings, and that is kind of reflected in the broader market. We got some jobs reports recently, and there's a lot of job openings right now. And even as they fall a little bit, there's still a lot of open positions out there waiting to be filled, and not enough people to step in, or not enough people willing to step in and do those jobs. So I know that's an acute problem that a lot of doctors are facing right now. So that's just a little sampling, depending on where you're at in your private practice journey, of some economic issues you might be facing. But all of these things are sort of symptoms of broader macro trends that are happening right now. And our hope is to give you some very micro actionable solutions during the next hour to give you a better sense of where to go and what's next, and how you can adapt to the times.
Excellent. And with that, we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to get started. A little housekeeping real quick. I did mention chat earlier. I should have said the Q&A button. And so you can use the Q&A to communicate with us. The Zoom webinar, for some reason, shuts down your chat. So use the Q&A to communicate, answer some questions. And we do have some questions coming in. Dr. Pham from San Diego's asking about, is it crazy to do a startup now, right? Do you do insurance, or do you go fee for service? So we're going to dive into all of those things today.
Love it.
And we are so excited to have you here. And welcome to the 2023 Market Report. And by the time we finish today, over the next hour, you're going to know why Trevor and me, Tim McNeely, why we believe that dentistry is still such a great industry for you, despite all the noise that you see in the news. You're going to really have a robust and comprehensive picture of the market, and not just a picture of the market. We're going to give it to you in context, within the context of the dental industry. And we're going to give you a way to see beyond the headlines, to really see the story that really is happening. But most importantly of all, we want you to feel confident to take your next steps. And maybe those next steps are you just getting a second opinion on where you currently are. Maybe it's talking to someone about making a transition, either buying, selling, or moving your practice, consolidating, right? Whatever that transition piece may look like. Or maybe your next step is just staying put and doing exactly what you're doing. Whatever your next step is, we want you to feel confident in doing that. And I am so excited to have Trevor Kimball here with us today. And man, I'll tell you, when you really start looking at things, according to the American Dental Association, there's going to be 577 dentists in California, that's right here, who are going to either walk away or sell their practice every single year. So almost 600 dentists. And behind every single one of those transitions is a story. And you have a story also, your practice, your life, your family, your friends, and even the other people in this meeting with you. You all have a story. And the actions that you're taking today have led up to it today. And we want to help you make better choices so you can continue to write a better story. Now I know what you're thinking. Who cares about this story stuff? What the heck does story have to do with a 2023 dental market report? Well, the truth is many dentists today are actually missing the opportunities that are out there because they're caught up in the headlines. They're caught up in the news cycles. And that's why we've invited Dr. Trevor Kimball here to speak to you today on really the story behind the headlines. And Trevor, he is a doctor of a different sort. Trevor has his PhD in philosophy of religion. He wrote his dissertation on how story shapes our lives to give them meaning. But what's important to you is Trevor is also the president of Integrity Practice Sales, one of the largest practice brokers in California. And they've helped over 500 dentists really take control of their practice transition story. And over the next hour, you're going to have the opportunity to hear from Trevor and gain some valuable insights and actionable strategies to really help you navigate this ever-changing dental market landscape.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate that. And for those of you who don't know Tim, I should tell you, you probably won't find this too surprising, but life is full of unknowns. Social, political, and economic uncertainty is around every corner. But what if there was a way to navigate the unknowns with confidence? That's why we have today the host of the Dental Wealth Nation podcast and #1 best-selling author, Tim McNeely, to speak with us. Tim is known for helping dentists and select professionals build true wealth so that they can thrive no matter what life throws at them. During our time together, Tim will help moderate this discussion and provide insights on how you can move forward in this uncertain world. So with that, we're super excited to have you, and welcome. Welcome, Tim. Good to be
Hey,
on with
thank
you.
you. Yeah, no, I'm excited to do this, Trevor. And let's just get right into it, right? We've had some job reports come out this week. And I mean,
We sure have.
This has not been just a low news week. There's been a lot of stuff going on. We've got the Fed possibly talking about hiking interest rates again. It
Yep.
seems like them rising interest rates hasn't slowed inflation. And so what the heck's going on?
It's a great question. That's a great question. It's funny, a quick segue. One of the reasons I saw for that people gave for inflation starting to tick back up was unseasonably warm weather. And right now, that seems like not at all what we're experiencing, at least in my little neck of the woods. I'm coming in from San Luis Obispo, California, on California's beautiful central coast, where it is currently deluging. The water is everywhere. And because of that, I couldn't really do this from home because the dog was barking a little bit. And the office, there were some like down trees and some closed freeway exits and things. So I'm doing this from a coffee shop. So, thoughts and prayers for my internet connection. But I think so far it's going well. And at least I've got a cup of coffee and I'm ready to roll. So just like with the economy, when life hands you rain, you just got to roll with it.
There's certainly a lesson there, and I think that's so important because, right, socially, politically, economically, there's no certainty out there right now. But there is some certainty in our dental practices, and you've worked with 500 plus dentists, helping them transition. And what are you seeing kind of go on right now within the practices that you're working with? How are they dealing with the uncertainty of inflation and staffing and hiring? What are they doing to really move forward in this crazy world that we're in?
Yeah. Okay. Solid question. Big question. So let's try and break it down a little bit here. I'm trying to think the best way to sort of approach this, but I'm thinking maybe we kind of go through the life cycle of an actual dentist, and think through. We'll start with some of the issues facing buyers right now. Then we can start kind of focus on the issues that our more mid-career doctors are going to be facing, or any doctors that are actually currently in private practice, and then we'll maybe focus on some of those issues that are unique to the doctors who are thinking about transitioning right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to start, because even we've got that question, is it crazy to do a startup right now, right?
Yeah.
Inflation, recession, right?
Yeah.
On the verge of war with other countries. Like is now the craziest time of the world to do a startup?
Yeah. So Tim, great points. One of the things I want to do, and one of my overarching messages for today, and it's something Tim alluded to already, but it's basically, if we step back and try and get some context. I'm a big context guy. Tim mentioned my PhD. I did some work in sort of narrative identity things, and a lot of it around the science of interpretation and how we think about interpreting texts and different things. Context is key. Context is everything. And when we're kind of, these headlines are just dominating, we get caught up in the moment, and we fail to see the big picture. And there's nothing more important in investing, in business, and quite frankly in all of life, than seeing the big picture and not losing sight of what we're actually doing this for, what the broader, more historical trends are, and what the context for these headlines really is. Because we all know that we live in this sort of attention economy. People are wanting our attention. The news isn't paid by giving us the news, they're paid by getting eyeballs on the screen, and that's how advertisers pay them. Social media, the same way. I mean, some of the most powerful ad companies in the world are basically just designed to get eyeballs on the screen, eyeballs on the screen. And they do that by delivering a quality product in some cases, and in some cases, it's a product that's really designed to exploit some of our human frailty. And so when we're thinking about some of these issues today, my big thing is, hey, let's take a step back. And so I think this is a perfect segue into thinking about buyers right now and interest rates. If you want to buy a practice, you really only need three things. You need a dental license, you need a willing seller, and you need some money. That's pretty much it. If you've got all three of those, if you've gone to school, you did all the work, you've got your dental license, you're ready to go. If you've got if you find a willing seller, I've got several. I've got 60, 65 plus right now, I think. Integritypracticesales.com, check it out. And then you need money. And money's the big one. That's usually the one that's the most complicated for doctors going into thinking about, buying a practice. And you need money, whether you're looking to, I mean, technically, right, you only need a dental license and you need money. The willing seller part is great. And I think it would be good to talk about that in a minute, especially in relation to that crazy to do a startup right now, insurance versus fee for service. And I'll address that in a second. But let's talk about the money portion first with interest rates. And this is what I was saying about context and interest rates. Interest rates have been going up dramatically over the last year, basically. The way interest rates affect things like practice values is by making it more expensive to borrow money. We all understand that, but it's nice to just put it in stark terms. Higher interest rates make money more expensive. When money's more expensive, my purchasing power goes down because I have a finite amount of cash flow. And so what I can buy goes down because money is now more expensive. That being said, we were really lulled into a lovely sense of security over the last 10 or 15 years with these unbelievable interest rates. And so I pulled up a little chart here. If you look at the, let's say, last 5 years, whoa, it looks like interest rates have more than doubled since their peak in 2019, the year of 2019 there, the first part of 2019, when they were about 2.5. Now we're up at, the prime rate is, I think, 4.75. But if we get some context here, go back 25 years, well, we find that, man, in 2006 or so, the prime rate was above 5%. And in just after the year 2001 or so, it peaked over 6.25. And so in the last 25 years, we're looking at something like a historical average. If we go back in time, if we go back all the way, if we go back much further, some of you will recall the interest rates in the early 80s around 20%. I think when my dad was buying a house, they had one of those mortgage books. Now I have a little calculator on my phone. But they had a book with the rates and the loan amounts, and you can kind of flip through it. And I think the lowest interest rate in that was 7%, because why would you publish something that went below 7%? That would be a waste of paper, So in a historical context, these interest rates are really getting back to kind of historical norms. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to highlight here. Oh yeah, Tim, walk us through this a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And right, this is why context is so important, is what we've experienced over the last decade, last 15, 20 years, it's been abnormally low interest rates. And so all of a sudden they rise a little bit and we're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? But the truth is we've been here before and we've actually been in a much worse situation, right? You go back to 1798. So we've got just a little bit of history here, and interest rates are up at 8% in the late 1800s. They were about 4%, and then 1945, rates dropped aggressively down to 1.7, and then Trevor was just mentioning this, and I certainly remember it from talking to my in-laws. They were borrowing money at 15%. And, they would always joke like, hey, we've really got to go to the bank and turn in all our Coke bottles now just so we can make those mortgage payments. And, so interest rates were very, very high, right? 15%. And, dropped down to 2, 1.5. And now they've been creeping up a little, but you can see interest rates change. And kind of coming back to what you were talking to, Trevor, right? Interest rates, it makes money more expensive to borrow, more expensive to buy a practice. But, I think this may be a good time to talk about, how do you start positioning a practice, or what do you want to look for in a practice when you're buying it in terms of the valuation piece, and how do banks figure out if they're going to lend you any money or not?
Yeah. So I talked about the two things you really need to buy or start a dental practice, and that's a dental license and money. If you want to get money, whether you're going to get money for a startup or if you're going to get money for an existing practice and you don't have $1 million of cash in the bank or $500,000 of cash in the bank, then you're going to go get a loan. The good news is these lenders, these banks, they love dentists. Incredibly low default rates. Dental practices are seen and continue to be seen as incredibly safe, grounded, fundamental investments. And the interest rates you're receiving, as much as they have certainly gone up, they're still well below the mortgage interest rates. Banks trust dentists more than your average homeowner. And so when we're looking to get a loan for a dentist, they want to see a couple things. They want to see they have a credit score of at least around 680, preferably above 700. They want to see a history of production. They want to see some liquidity, some cash in the bank. And they want to see, and this is the important one to Tim's point, is they want to make sure that the cash flow generated from the practice you're looking at can cover about 125% of your living expenses. And that is going to be kind of a proprietary formula. I always say that these lending decisions, you can't just go get pre-qualified for a dental practice the way you would for a home. It's not exactly the same because a home, a building is a building. You're not generating something from it. You're living in it. And so I can, qualify you up to 800,000 or 1.2 million or 1.8 million. Whatever I can kind of qualify you for, that's kind of a fixed number. It's a pretty straightforward math problem. Can you afford it? Do you have a history of income that can show that we believe that you will be able to continue to be able to afford this home? But if we step back and think about the dental practice transaction, there's two moving parts. There's the buyer and the seller, and the loan is always a function of both. So the cash flow generated by the practice that you're looking to buy needs to be at least 125%. So all of your expenses, and that includes your practice loan, your student loan payments, a proprietary sort of cost of living expense, and all of this, that practice income needs to be able to generate 125% of your living expenses. There's a few things you can do here. Just quick plug, if your spouse has some income, we can factor that in. If you're going to work 1 day a week as an associate, we can also factor that into cash flow. So there are multiple levers you can pull on here. But at the end of the day, they want to make sure that there's this thing called debt service coverage ratio. And that's the big important number when you as a buyer are looking to take on this practice. And that's the reason why, while it would seem like, you're fresh out of school, you don't want to take on too much debt, you don't want to get in over your head, because you might be coming out with a sizable amount of student loan debt and have some other different expenses, it might actually be more prudent and a lot easier to get financing for a slightly larger practice than it is for a smaller practice. And that is just the way it is. That is just the way it is. It's making more money makes life easier.
Yeah,
it's an unfortunate truth.
I want to pause there a second, because this is something I just learned a while ago that was really surprising for me. And and this kind of ties back, and we're going to dive into, do you do a startup, do you buy? We'll get to that at the end here. But really, it's easier to buy a larger practice than a smaller practice, and that was shocking to me.
Yeah. I mean, it just boils down to cash flow. Another factor here is that larger practices often have systems that maybe are a little bit better organized, or a little bit, maybe these larger practices have worked with consultants. They might have a slightly larger team, and so can absorb some different team changes and things a little bit more easily. So there's a number of reasons, but I mean, primarily what it boils down to is going to be cash flow.
Yeah, no, excellent. And since we're talking about, kind of acquiring practices, buying them, right? Kind of and we're going through the phases of doctors here, right? You've really got the startup phase, then you've got the mid transition or the mid career phase, and then you've got what do you call that last phase?
I mean, sort of the retirement phase, the ready for another journey phase. I usually just call it the transition, the time of transition.
Okay, so we've got kind of beginning, middle, and end, so to
Yep,
speak.
yep.
All right. So we've been talking a little bit about the beginning stages, right? And
Mhm.
certainly the importance of interest rates and the economy and everything that's going on. We talked about how banks really do love lending to dentists. In fact, I was talking to one of the great dental lenders, Provide. I'll give them a shout out. And I was surprised to find out how little their interest rates have actually gone up compared to home
Yeah,
mortgages. And so completely different marketplace, isn't it?
absolutely. Absolutely. And it just reflects the risk that these banks feel they're taking on. And so when you have a sort of your standard homeowner buying their first home, the bank sees that as considerably more risky than a dentist buying a dental practice.
Yeah. So, and with so kind of then, let's say, maybe between that startup and, kind of mid-career, maybe a doctor's thinking about acquiring some real estate too for their practice. Can we just touch on that
Absolutely.
briefly?
Yeah. I mean, and I'd like to tie this into this crazy to do a startup right now question as well, because um, I, I've kind of a lot to say about that. I don't know if any of you guys have done construction lately. I did a remodel of my house last year, and it took forever, and the wait times for contractors were incredibly long, and it ended up being quite expensive. And so just based on that, I don't think it's absolutely crazy to do a startup right now. I really don't. If you have a very specific vision for what you want and you've looked around and there's nothing that kind of fits that vision. But I will also say that I don't think it's usually cost effective to do a startup. A lot of the doctors I know that have done startups have ended up spending roughly the same amount of money that the doctors who have purchased practices have spent. And so you can easily spend 800,000, 600,000 on a startup. And then you have to think about the opportunity cost. I mean, you're going to be probably working as an associate while you build out your space. Whatever inevitable delays there are, your rent payments are probably still going to be due. You're going to be going through and having to even if you have a manager who's doing the construction and these different things, you're still going to be involved in that process. It's a time-consuming process. And again, this isn't to say don't do startups. I think there's a lot of space for startups right now if you want to do one, but go in with your eyes wide open, because I think it's usually about the same price as buying a practice, and it takes a lot longer to get your first paycheck when you're doing a startup compared to buying a practice where the end of month one, you're generating profit. There is dentistry on the schedule. There are systems in place for you to actually, take home cash. So that I think is one of the big differences. The other thing I'll say for startups is if you have the opportunity to buy charts, or if there are turnkey offices near you too. I've seen a couple really successful doctors who have kind of done a hybrid model where they purchase someone else's build out, put a fresh coat of paint on it if it wasn't already. Sometimes, every so often, for whatever reason, a doctor does a startup or does a big build out and then practices in it for a year, but it was their third practice or whatever, and they just wanted to focus on the other two. They realize, all right, they're just going to cut their losses and leave. And there are opportunities like that out there right now. Also, the chart sale. The chart sale is one of the best marketing pieces you can do. If you can spend $150 to $250 on a patient chart, and they're coming to you and you're developing that relationship, you have a patient for life. I mean, that is an incredibly high return on investment. And I think it's, if you're doing a startup, you want to work it in tandem with some solid marketing. But I've seen practices grow tremendously, pay back their investment, in their first year. And those chart sales can be hugely important. They can be hard to find, but it can be just a huge boost for your startup. So.
Wow, what a great strategy. So would you even possibly recommend that for someone who is in mid-career and looking to boost their production? Can they do? Can they buy some chart sales?
100%. Again, they're not always easy to find. Obviously, the geography matters a lot when it comes to a chart sale. And also kind of clinical philosophy type of practice does matter, but it's not, I've seen successful chart sales where even if you lose half the patients, you're still so far ahead of where you were before, and you're able to pay back that money so quickly relative to the influx of new patients that it can be this incredible investment.
Wow. Okay. So right, even though they're more difficult to do, it maybe we're starting to watch for
They're
these
more
look for
difficult
these
to
things.
find. I don't think they're
Yeah.
more difficult to
Okay.
do. And our agents at Integrity Practice Sales are pretty good at walking through that. I'd be happy to walk you through that, but it's the same type of transition. It's the doctor, just like you would in a normal practice transition, is going to write a letter to their patients and say, I'm retiring, but I've found this great doctor. And instead of saying he's going to be or she's going to be in my practice, it's going to be they're just right down the street and I'm placing you with them. I've transferred all the records. And if you're really wanting to, one thing we do in those transition letters sometimes is basically say that this new doctor that you found, that you vetted, is going to be providing care for you and your family. And that also sends a powerful message to your patients. So it's the same type of transition. It's just they're moving down the street in this instance. And with dentists, switching costs are generally pretty high. No one wants to go find a new dentist. Something sort of bad has to happen usually to find a new dentist.
Yeah.
The ADA did a study years ago on why patients leave a dental practice. 1 out of 10 left for perceived quality. 1 out of 10 left for price. 1 out of 10 moved away. And then 7 out of 10 left because of bad attitudes in the office. Bad attitudes in the office.
So answering the phone and saying, "What do you want?" is a bad move.
Not great. Yeah, it's not
Okay.
great.
Okay. So little things like that, right? Right. We talk about, right, how do you position your practice for success in all this uncertainty? It really comes down to the small things, doesn't it?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, the fundamentals are the fundamentals for a reason,
Yeah.
But that also goes, and I want to definitely talk about inflation. And I think this is the perfect time to talk about inflation, and also thinking about that fee-for-service PPO question that was brought up earlier.
Well, right, because I mean, all the PPOs, they keep raising payouts every year. They want to give their doctors more money. Delta Dental is awesome to work. Wait, that's not the case, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, unfortunately. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I read an article recently. The ADA's Health Policy Institute puts out a lot of great stuff. And it was an article basically on consolidation and like PPO payouts, basically insurance payouts. And they were saying that their kind of working hypothesis was, well, the market is taking the consolidation of the insurance companies and their sort of monopoly on that insurance space and using that to drive prices down. But at the same time, the response to that in the market has been consolidation in the industry, where you have more practices, so you're able to negotiate more and drive prices back up. That was their working hypothesis. The conclusion was, yeah, even with all the consolidation that's being talked about in the dental industry, even those guys don't have a huge advantage when it comes to negotiating with these insurance companies, because there are still so many dentists out there and so many opportunities. So it's been a really interesting
and real quick,
time.
when you're talking about consolidation, you're talking about the DSOs out there and these big group practices and
the extra large group practices. Yeah, not your 2 or 3 practice shop, but your 20, 30, 40 practice shop.
Okay, right. And the theory being, right, if you had 500 practices or 1,000 practices, you could go to the insurance companies and say, hey, pay us more money because look at all the patient flow we're sending you. But the reality is the ADA found that really doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that they have some leverage if you have a ton of practices, but the leverage was no way equal to the leverage that the insurance companies have in driving down reimbursement rates.
So the insurances they're still the bigger player.
By far. And so we've actually been helping a lot of doctors. I do some really local kind of business coaching here on the Central Coast of California. And something we've been doing with a number of doctors lately is helping them go out of network with insurances and becoming fee for service. And I don't necessarily fully have the data to back this up, but my current kind of working hypothesis is that we're going to be getting closer and closer to a time where the PPO practice is going to need to see a lot more volume. And I mean, this is already true, but I think these pressures are going to intensify. The PPO practices are going to need to see a lot more volume. You're going to need more hours. You're going to want more associates. You're going to need more providers, all of this. You're going to want to be really maximizing your space, all of these things. Whereas these more concierge fee for service practices can absolutely still flourish. Dentistry is expensive, but it's a matter of priorities. My wife had an emergency appendectomy a month ago or so. And I mean, just compared to the rest of the medical establishment, dentistry is dirt cheap.
Yeah.
You know, and
Well,
so.
Yeah, I want to pause there for a second because I've got a question around this too in terms of the moving to fee for service and how that impacts practice valuation. So if you've got two practices exactly the same, both doing $1 million of revenue, both have the same expenses, and the only difference, right? Like we'll even put them right next to each other. So location isn't even a factor. Like, is there a difference in practice valuation when you look at a practice generating its revenue from PPO versus fee for service?
Yes and no. So let me answer that and tell you exactly what. Let's imagine we have a fee for service practice that has really low fees. And they are working 5 days a week. You know, this doctor is cranking out dentistry. And then we have a PPO practice that is highly refined. They're collecting everything that comes in. Every patient that leaves with an appointment. Their cancellation rate is really low. They've done their best to negotiate with the PPOs, and they're providing a great service. And that doctor is also working 5 days a week. No, those practices are probably going to be valued roughly the same.
Okay.
However, the average PPO reimbursement rate is roughly 50 to 60% of UCR fees. So your cash fees are considerably higher, as everybody knows, than your PPO reimbursement. And so if we think about that, if there's a practice with solid cash fees, and this speaks to the inflation point as well, we understand that things are getting more expensive. We understand the moves that the broader economy is making, or the Federal Reserve is making to try and curb inflation. But if we compare these two practices, the one with the solid fees and the PPO practice, that's kind of your average PPO practice, one of those doctors is collecting $1 million on 3 days a week, and the other one is collecting $1 million on 4.5 days a week. One of those is more valuable because the doctor's time is actually being spent more efficiently in the fee-for-service practice. So the difference isn't necessarily whether it's explicitly a fee-for-service practice or a PPO practice. It's, hey, how much time is this doctor putting into their practice? What kind of returns are they getting for their investment in their practice? So that's how I would think about that question.
Well, and it's going to be easier to do, in a sense, right? If you've got the reasonable fees, the right cash fees, it's going to be easier to be doing that $1 million on 3 days a week instead of 4.5. And so that's really where the fee for service comes in, is it allows you to get paid what you're worth. Okay. And then what about even membership plans? And we'll just spend a couple moments on that, right? That's recurring revenue in a practice. And so, right. And once again, we're talking about how do you deal with all the uncertainty out there? How do you deal with rising costs? Well, you can raise your membership plan fees every single year, just a little bit to help offset that. And so do you see that as an added value for practices?
I think having a membership plan, especially for a fee-for-service practice, is a really smart way to go. I also think, and this is super important, is keeping your fees at a good level, at a solid level. On the consulting side, I like to go in, and some of you are probably familiar, or most of you are familiar with the NDAS, the National Dental Advisory Service surveys. You probably get one at the end of every year. And they take all this information about fees and they compile it into a single database. So you can actually go through, and I can print out for every zip code for each percentile where the fees are for each procedure code. And so this sort of chart that's based on every zip code allows me to go through and say, okay, your fees are in the 30th percentile. Is that where your practice is? And I like to go into practices and ask the team, because honestly, if the team doesn't believe in your fee increases and they start complaining to your patients and things, then your increases are doomed. But I've also found that if your team understands why we were raising fees and understands where your fees are relative to other practices in the area, then they can be totally on board and confident presenting those fees. So the question I usually like to ask is, hey, compared to other dentists in the area, where do you think you guys are in terms of your customer service, in terms of the care you're able to deliver to patients, in terms of the quality of the work you provide, in terms of the quality of the experience that you're able to offer, relative to the other practices in the area, where do you think you are? Are you right in the middle? Then your fees should probably be right in the middle. But a lot of practices say, hey, we're near the top. And my response to that is, well, then your fees should be near the top. Let your fees, we're not saying go crazy. I'm not saying raise them way beyond any other practice in the area. I'm just saying that your fees should reflect where your practice is relative to this area.
Yeah, no, great stuff. And we've got, about 24 minutes left. And so, we've been having a great discussion just about the 2023 market, what's going on, how do you deal with inflation, how do you deal with recession, how do you deal with all the social, political, and economic uncertainty there. And we've covered kind of the person at the beginning of their career. Let's spend a little time about the mid, right in the middle now.
Yeah.
And you're in the middle, you got this practice that's maybe kind of working, maybe you got some staff issues, maybe you're thinking about acquiring real estate for your practice. Like how do you start putting a plan together so that 15, 20, 30 years from now, you're ready to go? And we got some questions coming in that we will get to here. But let's talk about that mid-career doctor right now. What are some things they can be doing to position their practice for success in the midst of this uncertainty?
Yeah. Wow, May, great question there. So, and we'll get to it. Also, hi. And so the one major way we want to deal with inflation, want to deal with these things as a mid-career dentist is exactly what I was just saying about making sure your fees are high. And let's step back for a second and think about inflation in relation. Yeah, Tim McNeely is going to answer this question live. That's great. Let's think about inflation and staffing shortages. And really, this is kind of the whole story of the economy right now in the microcosm of the dental practice. Right now, there is a fairly consistent staffing shortage in dental practices. It's one of the number one issues that dentists are facing. And there was a lot of like a year ago, we were saying, okay, this is just a sort of post-pandemic hang up. As we return, everything's going to kind of normalize. But now it's feeling like, yikes, excuse me, we're actually kind of in trouble here. I think it was something like 35% or more practices are feeling understaffed with relation to dental assistants and hygienists. I had some figures here. There's a great study that came out that actually has some nice recommendations in it as well, different data around pay raises. And I'll make sure we get that study sent out to everybody after the webinar. We'll send an email out with this stuff. But it is worth pointing out that the staffing shortage, so we've got all these empty jobs. Because of that, retention is harder. That's driving wages up, right? We can't hire. People have the opportunity to move elsewhere for higher wages. The market is really good for those workers, and it's not great for the business owners when there's a lot of empty job openings. Good for workers, bad for business owners. It's supply and demand, right? It's supply and demand. And so these assistants and hygienists are wanting more. They're receiving more because we're having to retain them. And there's a few ways that we can talk about there's more that we can offer than money, and I'll talk about that in a second. But that's driving, because now all these people their wages are going up, their spending power is going up, and they're going out and spending money on a finite number of resources. And so that's making this price competition go up, which is driving inflation. And so it's like it's the whole story of the economy, just in that microcosm of the dental practice. But that's truly kind of what's happening right now. And so when we think about dealing with the staffing shortages, culture, so important. Culture to dental practice is what gets rewarded and what gets punished. That's culture. Think about that for a bit, but it's accurate. And so any culture you want to make, you can. You just have to reward the right things and punish the right things. And so if you're having fun in the office and you're laughing and everybody's on the same page and your communication is really solid and there's not a lot of interpersonal drama, which, I mean, I know for a lot of doctors, it's like, yeah, this is the dream, but how do I get there? And it's tough. It's not an overnight. There's no overnight system for this. A couple things that we do is instituting a bonus system that kind of shares the wealth and while protecting the doctor. Doing more kind of staff engagement stuff, having lunches, spending time together, that stuff matters. And being present with your team, that's another big one. If you just are showing up, working, and getting out of there, you're really missing an opportunity to build the relationships with the team that kind of makes this possible.
Yeah.
And so,
and I'll actually even pause there, because you may be listening to this saying, yeah, I know how important culture is, but like, I'm just really good at dentistry and I suck at being a leader. I hate it I hate doing the team stuff. I just abhor that. I don't want to get better at it. I don't want to do it. Well, I want to let you know, I empathize with you, because I'm not good at that stuff either. Like holding team meetings and managing my people and like motivate, like that is not what I do well. So you know what I did? I hired someone who is good at it. And so if you're a doctor and you're thinking like, yeah, I don't want to build culture, you don't have to. You can hire the right people to do it. And even on that hiring piece, right, once again, I think it's so important we zoom out and we look at the bigger picture, because you've got to really make your practice more competitive than others. And one way you can do that is through offering benefits, right? 401k plans, doing a match, right? That helps you attract and retain great employees. And you're thinking, well, Tim, I don't have more money to do this. Like, I'm already strapped. Well, this is where getting that bigger picture together and getting a game plan together. So maybe you slowly start to transition to fee for service. You become more profitable. And all of a sudden you realize, hey, well, now I do have the money to do a match and put money away from my own retirement and mitigate the tax pieces there. And the money I save on taxes is actually going to more than pay for what I give my staff. But it's important for you to have that comprehensive picture of where you're going and what your practice, what your life looks at, because the clearer you can get on that, the more all of a sudden making these decisions will become really, really clear to you. So do that, and don't feel like you've got to be the one to build the culture in the office. You can certainly lead it, but you can get the right people on your team to do this for you.
Mm-hmm. Another plug I'll make, especially for some of the doctors where, you don't have the budget to hire another office manager or someone that's a culture leader or something like that. Two things you can do, or one thing I'm going to point out, and another thing you can do. The thing I want to point out is just that sometimes we have this idea of what a leader looks like. And we're like, oh, a leader is this like, strong, outgoing, super extroverted person who's out there and they're big time people person and they're doing all these things. That's not what great leaders look like. Some great leaders look like that, but that's not correlated necessarily with being a great leader. Great leaders can be quiet. Great leaders, you don't have to look a person a certain way to be a leader. You don't have to have a certain personality to be a leader. What you need is basically consistency, being consistent, wanting something, understanding kind of where you want to go, and being able to continually sort of just redirect people towards that thing that you want. And that redirection can be super extroverted, it can be super introverted. The other thing I was going to say in terms of actionable is you can kind of take the person that you think most exemplifies your culture on your team. Maybe it's an assistant, maybe it's someone in the front office, maybe it's a hygienist, and you can just talk to them and say, hey, what do you think we can do to improve the culture at the office? And they might say, it'd be really fun if we all went out for a lunch sometime, or if we went out, did a happy hour, or if we I'm a member of this organization and I thought it'd be great if we could all go volunteer and do something on a Friday, or whatever the case may be. You can actually ask your team. One of the big secrets of dental consultants is that they'll send out surveys to everybody, and then they'll take the team's ideas and they'll represent them to the doctors in a way with more authority. And the ideas are there, they're already in your practice. And so talk to your people.
Great stuff. So we've talked about, that dentist just getting started, acquiring practices, the costs that are there. We've talked about the person in the middle, some of the things they can do in terms of building the culture and the team and offering benefits, and the fee for service versus PPO. Let's briefly, on our last couple minutes here, talk about that doctor who's thinking about actually exiting their practice. They're at the transition stage where they're doing the exit. How do you start getting ready for that, once again, in the midst of recession and inflation and just all the economic craziness that's going on? What do you start doing to get ready for your exit?
Yeah. So one of the first things is to understand the value of your practice, and then talk to someone like Tim, who is happy to give you a second opinion. If you already have a wealth advisor, and if you don't, is happy to give you a first opinion. And so I think one important aspect, especially with regards to the economy, is just understanding the actual value of your practice, and also modeling that out with, all right, if I work for 2 more years and then sell, if I work for 3 more years and then sell, there's lots of different options out there. And I could do a whole webinar, of course, on transition options and what selling to a private buyer looks like versus selling to a DSO. And there's even a couple other transition options out there. But at the end of the day, a little bit of planning goes a long, long way. And so we can absolutely do practice valuations, but plugging that in and understanding what you want to do and where you want to go is super important. I know Tim can speak to that for just a minute.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I tell the doctors to start with. Even if we're getting a second opinion on what things look like and how much longer you need to work or want to work, or what does your transition look like, we always start with like, hey, we got to figure out actually what your largest asset is really worth. And those valuations are so important because they really become a roadmap to your practice. They give you data so that you can start actually tweaking the right levers and not the wrong ones. Because you may think, hey, I know I need to reduce expenses, so I'm going to cut my lab costs. But maybe when you look at those numbers, you actually find out, yeah, your lab costs are huge, but they're actually like right in line with where they're supposed to be, right? They're more than what you want, but they're not out of line. And you may find, oh, hey, but this part actually really is out of line. And so you should start adjusting that piece. And really that valuation is more than just, hey, your practice is worth $1 million, right? It really is usable data that you can crunch the numbers on. And that's the other thing I'd encourage you, no matter where you are, if you're starting up, if you're in the middle, if you're getting ready to exit, crunch the numbers, run the numbers, and we'll talk about, the uncertainty here in a bit, because we had a great question come in about a doctor buying a building and some unexpected costs coming in. She's working with the right professionals and even left a cushion on top of everything, and still the thing went over budget. So we'll touch on that, but really crunch the numbers. It's so important to do that no matter what stage you're on, because as we keep talking about the economy and the uncertainty out there, the kind of picture that I get is, really your practice is like a boat on the ocean, right? It's just floating along, doing its thing. You're heading towards a destination, and you cannot control the storms that come along. You can't control the winds that come along, but what you can do is you can always be working on on your ship to make sure that it stays afloat, that the crew's running well, and that no matter what the weather throws at you, you're going to be able to make it okay, right? You want to patch those holes, you want to stop the leaks where they are, you want to improve the sales, right? And that's the same with your practice. The more you work on your practice, because that's the engine that drives everything. And so I would encourage you, the way you deal with the social, political, and economic uncertainty is you keep working on your practice.
Tim, that's the advice, right? That is the advice. I want to mention 3 things really quickly that all have to do with things you've just said in the last couple minutes. First, Tim was talking about, making sure all your expenses are in line. And I want to remind everyone that there's 2 ways to change a ratio. You can spend less money, or you can increase your revenue. And so what I see happens a lot, especially as doctors near retirement, is they start just slowing down. You start slowing down, you take more vacation, you're not quite as hungry, you're doing all these things, and your expenses stay the same. But because your revenue starts going down, the percentage that these expenses represent start cranking up, and that just eats right into your profit. Because all your expenses, all these line items on your profit and loss statement, they're not changing necessarily. I mean, some of them are a little bit variable, maybe lab and supplies go down a little bit, but the rest of them are pretty much consistent. Most people aren't really cutting hours for their assistants or their front office people. And so we want to, as much as possible, sell before we start doing this. And there's options, we can talk. But that's one thing I want to say. Ratios, there's 2 ways to change a ratio. Keep the revenue high, keep those collections high, and you can also change that percentage. The other thing I want to say is just that dental expenditures as an overall indicator are going up, and they went up through the last recession. As we talk about kind of recession proofing and some of the different things you can do, and we want to be sure we're watching those expenses. We want to be sure we're keeping a solid emergency fund. We want to be sure we're really talking to our patients and working with them as much as possible. But remember that people will continue to need dental care. I like to talk about my sort of vending machine thesis, which is essentially that if you had a vending machine in the back of Walmart that would spit out prescriptions, and all I had to do is put my prescription in, it scans my face, and boom, I get some pills. That sounds great. I love it. If I went up to a vending machine in the back of a Walmart and got an eye exam, I just look in and they do the whole eye exam, and it spits out some glasses for me. Amazing. I would love that. If I have a toothache, I'm not going to go up to the vending machine and let the machine go to town, right? It's not going to happen. People are going to continue to need dental care. We all know that also, as we learned in the pandemic, when people ignore dental care, or as everyone else learned in the pandemic, it comes back with a vengeance. And so recessions change our mindset, but historically, and this is my big point of backing up, looking at some context, I expect dentistry to fare very well through any potential recession. And the final thing I wanted to mention when it comes to selling, we've all heard the old adage, buy low, sell high. When the stock market is down, when there are deals to be had, which is kind of what happens during a recession, there's deals to be had. That's when you want to buy. That's when you want cash on hand. That's what all these value investors have been waiting for. And we know that in our heads, right? But not in our hearts, because investing is as much a heart thing as it is a head thing. It's about staying the course that you set when times were good, and you set it knowing that times won't always be good. But then when times are bad, we want to do things like sell. What we want to do is sell our good assets. Tim could talk all day, I'm sure, about asset allocation, but buy low, sell high is really intuitive. Asset allocation is a little bit counterintuitive. It means you want to sometimes sell the thing that's going the best and buy more of the thing that's doing the worst right now, because we believe in our thesis, we believe in this particular set of securities or whatever it is. And so it's counterintuitive, even though buy low, sell high makes perfect sense. Right now, practice values are at all-time highs. Supply is really low, demand is very high. And so if you're considering selling your practice, it is a great time. I expect it could I mean, honestly, like, I don't want to scaremonger and say, oh, it's all going away. I see those emails all the time. I think they're rubbish. Yeah, the market is changing. There's a little bit of consolidation in all this, but it's still a remarkably high percentage of doctors that work for themselves or for small, like, work as an associate in a private practice kind of thing. Um, the number, it's like 10% of all doctors that work in DSOs, something like that.
Yep.
It's not this, like, if you focus on just the headlines and you miss the big picture, which is that dentistry as a whole is thriving. And right now there is low supply of dental practices for sale and a lot of motivated buyers, a lot of lenders that want to lend. And so if you think about buying low and selling high, now may be a good time.
Yeah. So go ahead if you've got any questions left. And thanks for
Well,
that
yeah.
beautiful just overview, Trevor. But if you've got some questions, put them in the Q&A. We've got one we're going to get to. And I want to briefly address, like, how do you get help, right? How do you move forward as your Q&As come in, as you type those in on anything you've heard, put them in there. But how do you find help? And I would encourage you, reach out to Trevor, reach out to myself. Even if we don't work with you on whatever particular issue you have, we've got some of the biggest networks out there, some of the best resources. We're happy to make introductions, even if we don't work with you right now, right? We want to serve you. That's the purpose of doing this event and really getting you information. So whether it's, going fee for service or marketing your practice or chart sales or whatever it may be, like reach out. We will get you to the right people, even if we don't do it internally.
If you're on this webinar and you were one of the people that prevented Tim and I from just talking into the void, I owe you one. So give me a call. I'd be happy to chat or, give Tim a call.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to get to this question here about right, doctor buying a building, right? Had their estimate, even had a 20% cushion for everything.
Yeah. Can I just read the question out really fast, Tim? And
absolutely.
Then you can, So I just recently bought a condo suite and I was quoted and estimated $300K for build out 6 months ago on the high end prior to purchase. So before purchase, prior. I even added a 20% cushion on top of that and got the appropriate loan. When it was time to get bids, it was $500K. Part of it was because the building installed a new high-end air conditioning unit that cost $123K alone. This was not privy to me prior to purchase, and now I have to come up with another $150K. This is a huge sticker shock. I hired all the right professionals beforehand to make sure this was the right move for me. How can a purchasing dentist deal with these uncertainties to plan for it appropriately, especially when costs are tight? Great. I mean, great question. This really goes towards what I was saying earlier, I think, about real estate and construction right now being insane. May, I'm sorry, that sounds really terrible. The building is beautiful. I've driven by it. But yeah, Tim, do you have thoughts on planning ahead for this?
Yeah, I mean, well, and I'm certainly no attorney, but I hear when things that are said are not privy to me prior to purchase. I mean, that sounds like maybe something wasn't disclosed. Because right, you did everything right. You set aside the cash reserves, you had the cushion, you were prepared for cost higher. And so I would check and say, hey, what's going on here? And like I said, non-attorney, I don't even play one on TV. But when I hear things that are undisclosed or not privy, like I start thinking, hey, was something hidden and something not disclosed to you? And so, that's where, going back and, reading the contracts, having the right team of people in place, because if that's what happened, you do have the right team and there's some recourse that can take place to really help you. And once again, that's the importance of having the right team in place is to deal with these things when they come up. Just like if you're on your ship and you're in the ocean and all of a sudden you get a leak, it's like if you got the right team, they're going to get in there and plug it for you. And so unexpected things always happen, no matter how much planning you do. And this is a great example of that. You can plan, you can have everything and things happen. And then the question becomes, hey, do you have the team that can help you roll with the punches?
Yeah. Other recourse are, of course, other bids. I mean, if you're locked into a bid and it's gone up, that's a problem. If you're not locked in, perhaps there are other professionals out there. I mean, that 2013, yeah. I mean, so times have certainly changed in the last 10 years for between a drywall quote of 10,500 for a 1,400 square foot unit, and now a unit that's 1,700 square feet is 56K. I don't know, man. That is a lot. So I don't know the answer, but I would certainly hope that you could either get a second quote there, or talk to the attorney that helped you with all of these, or at least review your contract with your contractor. But yeah, that just doesn't smell quite right to me. But
Yeah.
I don't
But
know the answer.
yeah, and yeah, right. The good thing is you got people. We're going to help you roll with those punches and get you the solution. So, hey, and with that, we are at the top of the hour. Trevor, thank you for sharing so generously. This has been a great discussion. I certainly believe in dentistry even more today, despite all the noise that's out there. I know I have a more robust and comprehensive picture of the market from just zooming out. And my hope is all of you feel more confident about taking your next steps. And if you feel more confident, just put that in the Q&A. Let us know you feel more confident. And actually, we've got even more questions coming in. No, I think, yep, we got all those live. Awesome. And so with that, we'll sign off. We'll send a replay out to everyone. And if you've got any additional questions, please reach out. We're here to serve you and help you in any way possible.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Tim.
All right. Thanks, Trevor. Bye, everyone.
Take care, everybody.